Okay.
Hello and welcome to Monarchist Minute, Royalist news out of the good old U.S. of A. I'm joined by William Stout, John Arnis, and Victor Smith. We are going to shoot it over to John, who will be introducing our first topic on this 10th day of September.
All right. As everybody knows, we are one day out from the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. And I can start by saying it's very somber. A lot of us weren't fully sentient at that time. We were just babies, or we weren't even born yet. I was about I was like a year old or something. But the way my dad makes it sound, it's pretty serious. It was a pretty hard time for my dad. He still is very emotional about it. It's even 20 years out, it was a very serious time, and it changed America. It led to a lot of bad stuff that our government's currently still doing. But yeah, overall, a bad time and a very serious moment in American history. Biggest attack on America since 9/11. So yeah, it marked a change in America. I'm gonna pass this to William.
Okay.
Go to William.
For me, 9/11 is a little bit.
Victor.
I'm sorry.
I was passing it to William, but you go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, keep going.
Oh, sorry. 9/11 is a little bit more personal for me than it is for the rest of you three speaking, because I was old enough to have memories when 9/11 happened. As you can probably tell, I live in Baltimore, which is like right outside of DC. So we were sort of afraid that it could have happened, that one of those planes could have crashed here. Of course, it didn't. And I don't think that they were aiming for Baltimore. I think they were aiming for Washington, as well as the Twin Towers, which unfortunately, collapsed. But
yeah, they were aiming at a lot of different places across the country. I believe they had one right there next to you in DC. So they would have. I believe it was one of their plans to aim it at the White House or something like that.
Yeah,
it was a national, like, okay, let's bunker down, But yeah, continue.
One of a government building. I know that my uncle works in that sort of government metropolis.
He was across the street when it happened.
He was across the street when the Pentagon was hit. He was across the street.
Dang.
Yeah.
So he was really close to being affected by 9/11 directly. And so with that sort of attitude and that lens is how I view everything that's happened in these 20 years. And I'm going to pass it off to William, who was supposed to have spoken, and I sort of cut him off.
I will be the first to admit, I probably am not the person who needs to be talking about this. I was barely 1 year old at the time. But I do remember a lot about the aftermath, growing up in the post 9/11 era. I remember when I was 6 and my uncle came back from the Iraq War. I remember when I was in elementary school, they'd always play patriotic songs every morning, part of that new wave of revived patriotism that came after the attacks. I remember sitting down with my family, and this happened a lot as I got older, and we were watching movies made before 9/11, and especially the ones that took place in New York, the sense, the atmosphere that was lost after the attacks. There's something that died on September 11th, whether it be a sense of stability or security or just a feeling in general in America that everything is all right. It also died with 3,000 innocent people that day on September 11th, 2001. And I haven't known a world before it.
I guess that leaves me. I too was born. Well, I was born after this tragedy, and but maybe it's just the fact that I'm still an American. When I visited the Flight 93 Memorial on our way to DC for the class trip to DC, I cried. And I sort of made a resolution to myself, I guess, that something like this should never happen again. Um, you know, the it's sort of odd when you put it into the context of the broader historical picture. The Soviet Union had collapsed, going on just shortly under a decade before the 10th anniversary would have been was that December. So I guess in that sense, America, I guess we were still sort of in that post Cold War optimism, if that was ever a sentiment. The idea that we had beaten the Red Menace, and we were truly on top of the world. Of course, how true that sentiment was is a matter of debate, but I'm sure it was there in some extent. And the idea that that just came crashing down, having a worldview shattered like that, I guess it sort of must have been akin to Pearl Harbor. The idea that we had sort of built our own bubble, and then having that bubble of neutrality just shattered by the Japanese, and um, I can't say that unlike the Japanese, we could ever fully square it away just because of the nature of it all. It's not. I mean, in a sense, these were non-state actors supported by state actors, while we were attacked by the Japanese state directly. So in a way, it's a lot easier to say and more definitive to say that we got our revenge on the Japanese for Pearl Harbor. But I would say we did get our revenge. If well, we delivered justice in a sense for 9/11. I don't want to say revenge, um, but yeah, it's just I don't know. I mean, even delivering justice that still doesn't bring those 3,000 people back. The fact that 3,000
Mhm.
Americans were just killed for no good reason whatsoever. Um, yeah, I guess that's what I
Yeah,
have to
and
say
the
about
enemy
that.
was a lot more dispersed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
it's a lot
I
harder to gauge in that.
and I will say that yes, it did happen again. It happened in Orlando, Florida, in I want to say 2019 in that summer at the Pulse nightclub. Although it although it wasn't on the grand scale of 9/11, there are people in this nation who view the attack at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando as akin to it because Pulse was a gay bar in Orlando.
I mean, in that sense, that's difficult for me, because obviously I don't support gay marriage, and being a papist, as it were, to use the 17th century English terminology. But um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's sort of
Well,
weird in that I mean, in the sense
well,
that
people were well. I will say this: I am a Catholic as well, just for the record. I will say that we shouldn't really be happy that people died.
I'm not. Not. What I was gonna say is that the difference, I think, at least from the motivational standpoint, is sort of, I think the original terrorists in 9/11 sort of viewed America as this like somewhat Christian nation, when we aren't. And the attack on this gay bar or whatever you want to call it, um, that they're kind of, I think maybe they realize that we're not a Christian nation. We're still a force to be combated according to them. But you know, um, yeah, I don't know. Like, but all the different terrorist attacks that happened throughout the years after 9/11, they never obviously approached the grand scale. And I don't think any of them will really, unless there's an attack that's bigger and causes more visible damage, right? Because as far as terrorist attacks go, you don't really get something more visible than just two of the largest buildings, if not the largest buildings in New York City, being there one day and then not. So I don't think,
Yeah,
and
and
I hope that
it was
nothing
almost
surpasses it.
yeah, it was almost a lot of a bigger attack than it was. As I said earlier, there was one aimed at Washington D.C. At the Golden Gate. I believe it was Washington D.C. I believe the Arch at St. Louis, and there were a lot of others. I think the big thing that separates this from other attacks within America was it was indiscriminate, and it was specifically targeting Americans for being American. And the full extent of it was there were plans to kind of, ram a plane into our capital. And though it didn't happen because it was thwarted, we would never know where it would have gone. But I think what separates it's kind of like it was kind of like Pearl Harbor in a way that they weren't uh, they weren't targeting us because we were of one orientation or one race. We were targeted specifically as Americans, and that's something that united us in politics for a little while and everything like that. And it does outline why do we need like a serious bad attack? Why do people need to die for our government to be united like it was? Why does that need to happen in order to unite our politics? And that's a big issue that it brings up. It also brings up where's the line? Where's the line between our private rights and the rights of the government to defend ourselves? Where's the line between safety and liberty? That's another thing that it brings up.
Yeah, and
There's a lot of questions that brings up.
we're going to be
yeah.
talking more about that. We're going to be talking more about this later on in the podcast. But
Yeah.
I wanted to make this point now because you brought it
Mhm.
up, the overarching point.
Yeah.
A monarch would be able to unify our nation in times of great crisis. And we don't even need great crisis. We look at the state of Britain right now, and we'll get into what recently happened over there too. But people over there, generally speaking, love the currently recognized queen, and they love her, and she unifies pretty much all people in British society except for the hardline Republicans in Britain, of which there are a few.
Yeah, but I will, say not to, take. I don't know. This might come off, as us taking advantage of a tragedy to try to push our political agenda. So let me just say that's not, I guess, what we're doing here.
Yeah, I mean,
But like
what I
even
was saying is it's a shame that it took that for our
Yeah.
government to. I'm not necessarily like making it about monarchism, but I am making it like I don't think we should be proud that this like forced our government into taking action on a certain topic or a certain issue,
Absolutely.
or just uniting in general. Like, it's a shame that that had to happen for us to for our government to unite like it did, and it was only for a short time that it united.
but
I'm not
I-
necessarily commenting on monarchy about
yeah.
in this topic,
Well,
at least
it's
from
even
my point of view.
Yeah. Well, it's even what's even weird about it, and I guess we'll let William speak in a second because he's kind of been silent. Is
Yeah,
even even though once again I was born after this in AP Gov last year, um, I watched like a video of President Bush, former President Bush, throwing out the first baseball or whatever
The
at
first
the
pitch at
the
Yankee
first pitch.
Stadium.
Yeah, the first. Yeah,
I remember.
I
I
played a
remember.
season of baseball, but I'm not much of a baseball guy.
I, rem-
And
I remember that vividly.
yeah, it
I remember that vividly.
yeah,
He
and
stood behind the rubber and threw a strike. And that was one of the most emotional things that I had seen in my life.
yeah, it was just I don't know. Like even though I was born after the fact, I couldn't help but feel like I don't remember if I got goosebumps or not, but it was I don't know. It was something to see, and I wish we had that unity as a nation and a people. Because like my mom, she tells me like for a year after or whatever, everybody was like nice to each other. Everybody was holding the doors, even if you're like halfway across the parking lot. Obviously, an exaggeration, uh, but yeah, it's sad that I feel so disconnected from my fellow countrymen. Um, there's just
yeah. I mean, like
something about
if I saw on TV like Biden throw a pitch, I would probably change the channel, like right now. Like that's sad. That's truly sad. It like the fact that we as Americans don't have somebody to look up to and to truly, you know, truly revere and say, hey, that person is sacrificing every ounce of their life to, I mean, for us. Like, uh, I don't think we've experienced that outside of 9/11 because, uh, I mean, in modern history, that is. Because Bush, though I disagree with Bush on a lot of stuff, he really handled 9/11 like, in a way, a king would. Like, um, within hours, he was doing all kinds of stuff and interacting, you know, nonpartisan like, and that really, in a way, we all became monarchists. Like we all had that aspiration and reverence for a brief period of time that, hey, we might be in different party structures, we might believe a different thing as far as a legislator goes, but we could all, for a brief moment, look at Bush and say, that man is doing all he can to help our nation. And that is a monarchist thing, and this is being said after what I previously said. I'm not saying it to use 9/11 as a thing, but what 9/11 brought was a vision into something that could be better. That's all I'll say. And
and
it's
yeah.
it's sad. It's just this. It's sad that it had to bring us to that, and
And
we still
I
haven't gotten a
Well,
hint.
William, you've been kind of quiet. Do you
Yeah,
wanna?
let's hear William if he has something to say.
I think all of you have made beautiful points, but I do want to follow up on something Victor said earlier. There were some very dark things that the U.S. government did after 9/11 too.
Yes,
Primarily the
yes, yes.
Patriot
yeah,
Act, which still endures
Oh yeah,
to this day.
I
And
think I recently got into an argument about the Patriot Act on this very server. But yeah,
And for those of
that's a
and,
nasty thing.
for
and,
those of
thank,
you
and
who,
thank you very much, William, for bringing that point up. Just real
Yeah,
quick,
I
before
think
the
I
Patriot
subtly
Act,
mentioned it. But
before the Patriot Act, you could literally walk with your family member to the gate at the airport and drop them off at their terminal. Now you can't do that. Before, you had easier lines to get on airplanes. Now you got to go through TSA and all this other kind of security check. It just made going through airports a lot harder because of the nature of what happened on 9/11. William, go ahead.
well, I was talking more about the whole tapping the phone lines thing. Like the whole thing with wiretaps
yeah.
and being spied on by the government. That was a big fear
I mean,
during
that's
the Cold
always kind of
War.
been a thing, but that aimed it
And
at
it wasn't
specific
really a reality during the
American
Cold
citizens.
War.
Well,
But 9/11,
Mhm.
we know for a fact that the government started tapping random U.S. citizens' phones. And we let them primarily because of fear and the
Mhm.
trust and feelings of patriotism that happened after 9/11. There were
Mhm.
definitely people in the U.S. government who took advantage of
Mm.
those feelings and that sense of insecurity for their own advantage.
yeah.
And sometimes I do feel that they're not acknowledged enough and held responsible for basically depriving Americans of certain freedoms in
Well,
order to give us a sense of security.
well, you know what they say: never let a good crisis go to waste.
All right, moving on.
S-
The Justice Department under President Biden is coming up with a lawsuit about the new Texas abortion law, in which abortion is banned after 6 weeks or a fetal heartbeat is detected, except in the case of rape or incest. The
Wait, I
Sup-
thought it didn't include a provision for rape and incest because that's part of the reason why the Justice Department is suing.
Oh well, I mean, I don't know. I think that the only thing that is unlawful about this law is that it allows abortion at all. That's obviously not what
Yeah,
they're
I
suing
mean,
about. But I
and
mean,
also like I hate the fact that it's now becoming a thing where the federal government can just stiff arm a state into acting right. Like that, the whole point of a state is they have certain provisions and certain laws and certain things that they can, provide for themselves. And
Well,
like the fact that they need a law that the federal government didn't agree with, um, which is, I believe, is supported in the Bill of Rights. Anything not directly affected by, and the Bill of Rights is delegated to the states or to the
well,
people, and
well, hang on a second.
like
Hang on.
it's just, hey, let's punish them for making a law that we don't like. I don't like it. It's just icky. Um, if the people of Texas have a problem with it, they can appeal it themselves. I don't think we need the federal government coming in and intervening both positively or negatively, like we've seen with like California. How many times California has been saved. Um, it's perfectly within the ability of Texas to help themselves out if people have a problem with this law.
and
Now,
federalism
Yeah.
will be an issue that we can also take up in our next topic. Just wanted to
Mhm.
point that out. William, go ahead.
but
Yeah,
what
William.
the Justice Department is doing with this law, they're
Mhm.
not stiff arming the state of Texas. Basically, what they're doing is forcing it to go to the Supreme Court. And
Mm.
if I may play devil's advocate for a moment, I moderately understand why they're doing it For those of you who know me in the Discord, I'm more socially moderate and aren't as hardline conservative as some of my patriots. So, but I know this might be a very unpopular opinion, what I'm about to say. While I'm generally against abortion, I do think the heartbeat bill goes too far, primarily because it does not have contingencies for cases of rape and incest. And to me, that's very, very barbaric. The idea that a woman who did not consent and was sexually assaulted would have to carry a baby she did not consent to its conception to term, even if there was a safe and relatively ethical way to end the pregnancy early without causing extreme harm to the mother or to the child.
Well, obviously that's where all three of us are going to have to disagree, simply because I
Yeah,
don't
I was
know.
gonna, I was
it-
gonna like try and. I think a big thing is you can act. Perhaps a good remedy for this would be an assistance, which a lot of um, certain charities are getting better at helping um, mothers struggling with pregnancies. But I think there
Yes.
needs to be um, more interaction with a mother dealing with this kind of stuff. Um, I think there are alternative ways to do this, and I understand. I completely understand. It must be a pretty hard decision to make. I'm alone, and that's the big thing. The mother's alone, and the mother doesn't know what to do. Because her parents, instead of like loving the child or doing something like that, instead of making the decision to support their child, or the family making the decision to support the child that might have been, born from disgusting circumstances, that the mother has to, that the mother has to go and kill the child. I think that is a bigger thing that we need to address, is why are families so reticent on throwing away a life that has no, the person within the mother had no choice in the matter. They're not choosing their parents. They're not choosing the monster that did it to the person. I think a good way to remedy that, and I think it should be on the state as well. Um, if they're going to have a hard line like this, they need to start thinking about ways to assist a single mother dealing with this kind of stuff. I still don't think it's right to, provide abortions for that, but I completely understand
Well,
the idea behind
it is a very hard subject, and one that we should be dealing with in true charity and compassion for these traumatized women. I like
Mhm.
traumatized girls and women. And if you
Yeah.
are one of those, or if you know one who is struggling with this issue, and it just makes my skin crawl to even think about anyone dealing with this, because
Mhm.
I just find this topic abhorrent. You
And
can
there
you
are
can
people
speak
who,
to
yeah.
an organization called Project Rachel. It is an
Mm.
organization that is there to help women in crisis pregnancies. You can go to projectrachel.com to find out more details and how to get help. There is also, I imagine through your local government, there is also a domestic abuse shelter or a women's shelter that would undoubtedly take that person in if they're not full to capacity.
well,
Remember, we have to deal with these women with true charity, because they did
Mm,
not choose for this to happen.
That's why I ultimately think that this law is the first step. It isn't the fix all for what's going on in America. The root of the problem in America is families are disjointed and ultimately, to a certain extent, unwilling to help a person struggling in certain areas like this. And as a person that's been a part of campus ministry, I've been around organizations that assist women, both women who have had an abortion and women who are struggling with making that choice. And families really need to step up. If this
Yes,
is going to be the first step that Texas needs, and I'm a neighbor to Texas. What happens in Texas might affect me. So it depends on, okay, this is the first step. Okay, we need to, as Catholics and as some conservatives, social conservatives, we need to step up and really look at the adoption stuff like that. That's why I'm probably going to adopt when I'm older. Um, it all fits together, and when you don't look in a family orientation of this stuff, um, abortion is a very family oriented subject because when you have an unwanted pregnancy or a pregnancy that's very hard for the mother, it involves the whole family. No one person's in a vacuum, and it's going to be on the family to support that person so they aren't forced to make these decisions. And, taking the decision off of the table is only one of the solutions. And also, there needs to be government supported
of
um,
course.
And,
And
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 I,
I
supporting
will say
people
that
without a child and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yes, what were you saying?
The Democrats' cradle to grave policy that they're trying to push through, I think, is a good start with that. I don't really like the free universal pre-K
Mhm.
bit, but basically everything else in that bill I would happily sign on to and vote for, except for the universal pre-K thing.
well,
I mean,
I
I'm
mean,
kind of
I
on board with universal pre-K, but the big point that I'm trying to make is, you know, this abortion bill. I mean, first of all, I don't like the idea of that, and I stated that first off. I don't like the idea of the federal government getting its hands, and unless they're doing something blatantly unconstitutional or blatantly, bad. This is just a differing opinion across the political spectrum, and the fact that they're filing a lawsuit against the state for a law that the state did, I don't like. I am not really of the mindset that the federal government just gets to legislate what it thinks is right on all the states equally. And if you step out of line, you know, I think the federal government should stick with what's universally needed across all of the 50 states and leave it be. And on top of that, what I said afterwards. So,
and
yeah,
I mean,
it's multiply faceted, but yes,
yeah, I mean,
I don't like that.
I am more inclined to think that these, social needs should fall into the hands of the parish councils because once again, I
Mhm.
think that separation of church and state is bogus, and that needs
Yeah,
to happen on a local level more than anything. The parish councils themselves should handle matters like maybe help run the local hospitals and other
Mhm.
social things to for want of a better word than things. But I will also say that assuming that a rapist does not have any one to dependencies of his own, his assets should be seized and handed over to the woman in
Oh,
order to help with.
they
I mean, yeah, I mean, because because they should be under lock and key for the rest of their life, so it's not like they're going to need them. Um, it, it
yeah.
is it is I don't know it, and obviously
Yeah,
that
I also
doesn't.
don't like people like saying, "Oh, well, the mother," and I don't think any real pro-lifer has made the argument that, or any honest pro-lifer has made the argument that the mother should be punished. The mother absolutely shouldn't be punished. Um, I don't. It wasn't the mother's fault being forced and kind of manipulated by both her family or a significant other or societal pressures to do this, and we punish her for it. I think there needs to be, there needs to be hard legislation against or hard punishment for the people that caused her to have the child, so the rapist and things like that. They need to be severely punished, and the people that enabled her need to think long and hard instead of helping her through this, made the choice to kind of cast her out and say, no, you're not allowed this family. And this comes from conservative households, sadly. So I think you can't be conservative without at the same time being compassionate to your family members who are dealing with this stuff. And if you are going to be pro-life, you need to be both pro-life for that person dealing with that and that child that is currently inside of her that has no choice whatsoever than to either die or live. So you need to help the mother. And that's kind of, I mean, it's not necessarily forgotten by conservative, but it's kind of overlooked sometimes. And at the same time, it's a bludgeon for Democrats to say, oh, well, you don't care about anybody once they're outside of the.
And
It's kind of a double bludgeon.
When you're looking outside, looking in at the pro-life movement, especially about
That's what it becomes.
I'm very happy that we're having this conversation because one of the biggest things that frustrates me with the contemporary pro-life movement in America is how much it does seem at times that it's just moral grandstanding over the issue of abortion, but doesn't actually want to do anything to help the children that will be born or help the mothers through the pregnancy and do anything of actual meaningful substance besides just banning abortion.
Yeah, and once you get into the pro-life movement, there are organizations that helps single mothers and people who have unfortunately had an abortion and stuff like that really helps them and helps them get over this trauma that they've experienced. But yeah, it's kind of hard looking outside, looking in, like to see all that stuff because it's covered in the veneer that of pro-lifers. So it's kind of hard to look at on the inside how certain things go, but I can completely understand that a lot of pro-lifers are like that. And that's the more traditional, I guess, not traditional, but like more conservatives without compassion. And I'm not a compassionate conservative, and not the traditional compassionate conservative, but my mind outlook is if you don't do anything with charity outside of stopping abortion or banning abortion, that's one step to many steps of getting society back on track.
And another step to get society back on track. It's related to these two issues, and that is mental health. There are a record.
Mental health affects a lot of stuff in America.
There are a lot of veterans, I believe a record number of veterans who have committed suicide, and unfortunately, because of what's happened in this past month, I'm afraid to say that number is only going to continue to grow. And of course, there are other people struggling with their mental health. If you or someone you know has suicidal thoughts or tendencies, September is Suicide Prevention Month. Call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. The number again, 1-800-273-8255.
Wouldn't hurt to just drop that in the chat too. If
And
you get the chance.
and we will be moving on to another
Yes, 'cause
topic
this gets into
that
federalism too.
is just as heady as last. The
Yeah.
President Biden has now ordered all federal employees, except the Postal Service, because reasons,
Why the
to get
No.
the-
What is the reason?
Because
Mhm.
I guess
because the
they're
Postal Service
outdoors
is
or
part of a
something. I
different
don't
because the Postal Service is part of a different union. Anyway, the vaccine requirement, no exemptions are granted. According to the wording
Jesus.
of the mandate, no exemptions, at least on the federal level, will be granted to anyone, religious or I believe medical. I believe they may be required to provide medical exemption, but at that point, I guess they'll just fire those people who would be affected medically. And he has also encouraged, I will say strongly encouraged,
boy.
because I don't think that he can mandate that all businesses with more than 100 employees will be required to have their employees vaccinated.
or tested once a week, which is, of course, obviously that's going to be very difficult and is essentially
Maybe if
software
they're
saying get
free
vaccinated.
tests,
And
maybe.
what did you say?
Maybe if they're free tests, but
No.
it's just like, yeah, making a blanket statement about every single government employee, which there's a lot, every single one of them must be vaccinated. And no exemptions, none. That means anybody with a special, with a autoimmune problem that maybe they're allergic to certain vaccines, any of that stuff, they're not worried about that. There's a problem with these blanket statements when you don't provide any exemptions from them.
And of
It's
course,
just, it gets ridiculous.
And of course, there's the question, I would argue, of the constitutionality of this all. I mean, if Congress passed, not necessarily the federal government, although I'm sure freedom of religion will certainly be brought up by certain people, but under with the whole 100 people, I guess, given the Supreme Court just loves to interpret that interstate commerce clause by removing any word that may decide that may limit the federal government's ability and just say everything is interstate commerce now. If Congress passed this as a law, I'm sure that the Supreme Court would hold it up regardless of whether or not it's actually legit or not. I don't think it is constitutionally legitimate, but um but the fact that this is being done by, I assume, executive order, right?
Yes.
Yeah, executive order. Okay, firstly, I don't know. Executive orders are very annoying because what they were originally intended for is not what they're used for anymore. From my understanding, it used to be that if Congress say they allocated $100,000 to the Navy to do something, an executive order might be said, okay, we're going to have 20% of that be used for the repainting of ships into the glorious white and yellow paint job of the Grand White Fleet, because that would be based. And another 20% is going to go to, I don't know, replacing the anchors or whatever, right? So the executive orders, from my understanding, were originally meant, and I'm sure there are other examples, um to clarify a congressional bill. But yeah, that ain't happening.
Now they're
And
just political playing cards, essentially, for
yeah,
the president.
because I mean, it is, the executive order it's really weird. I would love to see our beloved Washington's reaction to that, because he is a man who, despite everything, I still have great respect for. And being our first president, I don't know. I mean, if you compare every president to Washington, I'm sure in some way those presidents will fail. Um,
Mhm.
but like, I would just love to, like, Washington would metaphorically. I'm not calling for violence against the president because I don't want him dead or anything. But he would probably say, "Benjamin, get the musket." it's
Yeah,
it's just
To play a little, to
it's
play
a
a little bit of,
problem.
to play a little bit of devil's advocate with a point that you made. Schools, like elementary schools, require a whole list of vaccines for children to have received prior to children being able to be enrolled in a public elementary school. So there is basis for a COVID vaccine to be required under that same sort of purview.
Yes, but that's not federal though. That's local. Well, now
Yeah.
all the public school systems are
Well, as it
ultimately in the
stands
hands of the
currently,
state.
it's
So,
yeah.
but
I'll be
like
back.
Are we
ideally
talking?
local.
Which type of federal employee are we talking about? People within the executive branch or the entirety of government?
I
Are
think
we including everybody?
I think it's just all federal employees except, as Victor said, the postal service, because I guess they have a different union. Which this
You
isn't one
think
of
they would
the
be the ones who would have had, because they're like on the ground doing stuff. You'd think that they,
well.
be
I
the
don't know.
ones
When it
that
comes
need.
to unions, very rarely do things make sense. I don't know, and I'm sure William will disagree with me, but public sector unions make absolutely no sense. The idea that we can have workers just bargain against the taxpayer. I'm sorry, if anybody's going to be deciding their salaries, it's going to be the taxpayers
I,
on a local level.
I
Anyway,
fully agree with you actually on that.
okay,
Oh,
because
Public
William and I are
are
very in disagreement on unions and their proper rules and such.
private unions are based. Public service unions are cringe.
Yeah, and I mean,
mm,
I don't know, but it is funny, as a side tangent, that
the
when I worked at my local Catholic cemetery. It's like a 4-minute drive from me. This summer, and technically, both of these cemeteries are in the diocese I'm in, but I was technically getting paid by the cemetery down in the state capital, because the employees of the cemetery I was actually working at had a contract with the Teamsters Union or whatever. And I heard the horror stories of the last couple guys who were on that union contract that I guess will be expiring soon enough so they can get rid of the current arrangement. Um, they would just sit around and do nothing all day, or maybe one of them would go out and shop errands. If there wasn't a funeral, they would just sit around the entire day, and and they couldn't do nothing. You can't do nothing because they're union, right? When my basically de facto supervisor was transferred there, I guess. Like, the grass was like so high you couldn't just cut it with the lawnmower, because then everything would, because I guess, I don't know what's the adjective or the verb, I guess, to describe it. But you can't just cut the grass like that, because then it would kill the grass underneath because of how thick it was. Because yeah, they wouldn't do nothing. So yeah, I've heard the horror stories of unions. Um, but I mean, I think I agree that in principle, private unions uh are good as an easy way of generally talking between the um the the body of the work, like the workers, more unifiably being able to express their grievances, or, hey, you're doing a great job this way, boss, with the employer, because the employer and the managers are a couple of people, and they can very easily express themselves. But when you got a mob, it's kind of hard for them to express themselves
Mhm.
without smashing things. Hulk smash.
things.
Okay.
Yeah,
Have we
trying
moved
to
on
get
to
kind of back
beyond?
on topic.
This
Oh.
is some
What?
Have we
What was up?
have we moved on? I had to step away.
We
No.
went off on a tangent.
We were
Okay,
talking
well,
about
okay.
unions,
Okay.
and
Our next topic will
I
be
would just say,
our next
go on to the
topic.
next topic.
John was.
My trying to get back on topic here. I would say the closer that you get to the local level, the more acceptable it becomes that you can have these sweeping mandates. But the thing about like when it's close to the local level, there is a lot of more flexibility because you personally know the person. Having a sweeping requirement for all government employees, all federal employees, to be vaccinated without the proper exclusions and things like that is just, in my view, a sweeping oversimplification of what happened. So for me, it's not necessarily them enforcing this, it is them excluding people that might have problems with vaccines, things like that, religious objections to the vaccine, and all of that. Because in my view, a sweeping, massive law that doesn't respect individuality and doesn't respect certain individuals want to be excluded from this is not really cool, at least on a federal level. Yeah, that's really all I have to say on the topic.
Personally, I'll admit I have bias on this because I have a big personal vendetta against anti-vaxxers, and I'll be honest, this makes me a little happy because the idea of dunking on the anti-vaxxers makes me.
You know, it will just make the
I mean, I believe they're all
anti-vaxxers say, you know
vaccinated.
what? I'm going to anti-vax even harder. You know,
I know
there's going to be
very
mass ways
few
of
people are
non-compliance.
actually.
But at the same time, it's an
I know there are people that
like
are
this
skeptical
that's
about the vaccine, but
choose if it's worth it.
yeah, I know that there
Anyway,
are people skeptical about the vaccine, but I've seen very few people, or at least few people that aren't on social media being spazzes. Very few people actually really, really against the vaccine. I mean, my dad may not be as right wing as I am, but he still took the vaccine. So
I
I
know
took the
people.
vaccine.
I
I'm
actually know.
perfectly fine with it.
I actually know people in my personal life who will not get the vaccine under any circumstances whatsoever. Anyway, moving on to our next topic.
Yeah,
The
that's
Elizabeth Windsor, the woman commonly recognized by the world as Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain. We will the unlawful usurpation of 1688 is not germane to this topic. So, for the purpose of clarity, I will simply refer to her as Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth has come out in support of Black Lives Matter. And before we get into anything else, I will ask William to take the proverbial stand, because he has information about how BLM in the UK is different from
do we have
BLM
a
in the
direct
US.
quote
And
from
then we will get the opinion of John or Charles said contra. William?
Okay, well,
Okay,
first of
do we have a
all,
direct quote
with
from
a grain of salt,
no.
that came primarily from a news headline, and that news headline came from, I forget the gentleman's full title, but he is the Queen's representative to London. So, as with most things that happen with the Queen, it's coming from a secondhand source from a person who said they've heard accounts from the Queen and has not come from directly from the mouth of the Queen herself. But back to the full thing, when we as Americans hear Black Lives Matter, is very different from what British people probably think of when they hear Black Lives Matter. Yes, there were a few incidents last summer with a few statues being vandalized, and the one statue of the one gentleman whose name escapes me right now. Forgive me. Being
Churchill.
torn down and thrown into the river.
Oh,
For the most part, Black Lives Matter, ironically, is a face of moderately peaceful protest in Britain, whereas in the US, it is the face of race riots. And another organization that has an interesting paradigm is the difference between Antifa in the US and Antifa in Europe, primarily Germany. We see Antifa in the US as British, and they do deserve their reputation. But when I was younger, I was watching a lot of videos in the early days of when the AFD was becoming big, and Jonah was talking to some of the members of the AFD when it was becoming big. And the AFD was talking about their encounters with German Antifa, and German Antifa compared to American Antifa. German Antifa makes American Antifa look like schoolyard bullies. American Antifa will harass people in the street, be noisy, be aggressive and menacing. German Antifa will follow you home and then Molotov your house. So I feel like
Are we talking about people who are actually against fascist, or just like
the organization
general
Anti-Fascist Action, which are
yes, that's a big
a
distinction.
bunch of neo-Marxists.
America is
when
very weird.
we hear the Queen talk about Black Lives Matter, we need to keep in mind that the British general public, and especially the Queen, might have a very different image of Black Lives Matter than we have in the US because they're in a different country on the other side of the world. I mean, they hear about the events that happened in Minneapolis, they heard about George Floyd and all that stuff, but they didn't necessarily hear of the aftermath of what transpired and to what degree it might have transpired.
Well, I will still say though that BLM in Britain, solely by the virtue of their tearing down the public patrimony, are still not an organization to support, especially of the hero Churchill. Like they're defaming of that's a famous picture now of the statue of Churchill where the statue's base has his name carved onto it, and they with spray paint crossed it out and wrote "was a racist." And even though I guess from my Yankee perspective, it seems as if BLM in the UK is a more mild strain of it. They still stand for the racial politics that are absolutely terrible. They still hold a very bad view of Britain's history, and they see her, even despite the fact that Britain was the the first major European power to end the slave trade, and us and the British were the people in the West African Squadron, mainly the British, hunting down slavers. They still see Britain as this racist to the core, imperialistic structure, yada yada yada. So BLM, even in its milder form, is still not an organization that should be trusted because the only thing true about BLM is the name. Is the only thing true is really the name that the statement Black Lives Matter. That's the only true thing about BLM.
The organization,
from what I've gathered,
the organization took a 3-word phrase that everyone should absolutely, unequivocally, 100% accept and embrace, and turned it into an ideology that is just as fervent as Hitler was with his racist Nazi ideology. Now, what I will say in response to the Churchill thing is that there are people in India who do not like Winston Churchill one bit, and they have good reason not to like Winston Churchill because Winston Churchill did not govern over there very well.
Well, he wasn't supposed to govern over there really at all. That's why they had the vice. That's why they had what was it, the viceroy, and he did try to alleviate
Mhm.
the Bengal situation by requesting shipments of grain, which FDR turned down, not out of malice, but because at the time it was Operation Overlord, baby, and we need all the ships we can get. So. And the fact that the famine was
Okay.
mainly caused primarily, I guess, by natural causes with the typhoons and whatnot over there in that part of the world. I know it ain't. I
From
know
what
it
I've
ain't
gathered,
fair to blame Churchill, John.
from what I've gathered, it wasn't necessarily the representative coming out and saying this. It was a interview that the representative had. So the philanthropist and businessman at the Monarchist representative said, so this person was asked, and he said the answer is easily yes. I have discussed with the royal household this whole issue of race, particularly in the last 12 months since George Floyd incident. He said in excerpts. So it wasn't even him. It was a response to somebody else's question about BLM movement. My idea behind this, as you guys said, it's probably because with BLM, they've taken the statement and they've kind of made the statement synonymous with the movement name. So when you say Black Lives Matter, that name is probably tied, and there's probably like psychology around somewhere for this. That
Yes.
name is tied then to that movement, or that phrase is then tied to that movement. So when
They
you
knew
say I don't
exactly.
like Black Lives Matter, they equate you not liking the movement Black Lives Matter to you not liking the phrase.
They
I
knew
don't see
exactly
a
what
lot.
they knew
Oh, what's
exactly
that?
what they were doing when they named their organization.
It really is deceptively smart, and honestly, I have to give credit what credit gives due, because by doing it the way they did it, it does make it almost impossible for anyone to make criticism against their movement because of
Yeah.
how foolproof.
From what I've seen about it, it is essentially a postmodern, essentially communistic organization.
It's
But with
not
that title,
communist. It is actually
see if I can find
okay, time
what
for
they
my
stand for.
left wing
Because from what I've
sorry,
left wing economics,
No, I mean
what
it was
they
founded
used
by
to have.
communists.
Yeah, they used to have
that
it's
word is
specifically they were
used
anti-nuclear
for
family. They were anti, I believe, capitalism and all this
Yes.
stuff. And I believe they had that on their website for a while. I don't
Yes,
know
they
if they
did.
still do. Um,
I
but
believe they
yeah,
got rid of the nuclear family thing after some pushback.
yeah,
But don't take my
because
word for it. Check for yourself.
that, yeah, I don't like how it started, and I also don't like how they're politicizing issues about race and tying it in with if you're left wing, you're automatically racist. Because if they were actually concerned about race, I would 100% support them. But the problem is they're not. They are absolutely politicizing it, and now it gets to the point where you're using your movement to ostracize an entirely different race, and then that's the problem. It's perfectly fine to advocate, like the NAACP. What is it historically done is advocate for minorities in America, which is awesome, great. But when it gets to the point where you are demonizing an entire political outlook. Now, when I say political outlook, I'm not talking about Nazis and things like that, because those ideas deserve to be stomped out, of course. But when you're just looking at conservatives, who I am actually pretty much an anti-racist conservative, I don't like race. I don't like the concept of race at all. So it doesn't even affect me. I'm literally the farthest you can get away from Nazi or ethno-nationalist. I'm the farthest you can get away from it.
We are all made in the image and likeness of God. Of course,
Like,
if you're
I
of
hate
course,
the concept.
yes.
Like, I hate the concept. And when they equate ethno-nationalism with conservatism, just blanket conservatism, and I'm a pretty unique conservative. They equate it blanket statement, equate conservative or right winger. In fact, most white people now, not necessarily in their purview, but generally speaking, this thought has stated that all white people are racist. So I don't even know what to think. It's just a movement that could have been and should have been helpful. And I completely understand the Queen's statement about saying, yeah, it's good, Black Lives Matter. The statement is good. I don't know if she meant the statement or she looked into the movement. If she looked into the movement and its history and its founders and all this stuff and still says Black Lives Matter is a good movement, then it's really ironic that she said that, because they would not be pro her.
Okay, we are going to move to a Q&A session. If you would like to, if you are in our live chat, you can request to speak by hitting the
and I can actually, if you don't want to speak, I can actually read it out now that I'm able to look at the text chat, so I can read your questions if you type them out.
And
so that's
if
one
you
option,
would,
or
and
you
if
can
you
jump on.
and if you would like to speak, hit the hand button. When you go into hit the conference room button, there will be a hand button which you can hit so you can request to speak. And if you hit that, and we will bring you up here and you can speak your mind. You can ask us a question. You can comment on something if you feel a pressing need to do so.
Yeah.
Or if not, that's cool. Leave us an awkward silence.
Yeah, I mean, we can just, if nobody wants to have questions or answers, we can just talk about what we went over. Oh, Tom B's writing something.
All right. So, what I think we should do now is just have because we are over an hour and we plan to do an hour, I think it's time for us to wrap up. So I believe that we should.
And yeah, we should do like maybe some form of brief vigil or memorial service for the 3,000 that lost their lives 20 years ago.
Okay, I will. Let me go ahead and get something prepared for a couple of minutes. Okay, let me prepare something. Okay, give me a moment.
And I want to thank our wonderful audience for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Okay,
we
we will close. Okay, now we will close in prayer, and because tomorrow is the anniversary, I will do a very special, I guess, prayer. So in the name of the
we do
Father
have
and
one question.
well, what's up?
We have one question.
Garth Calhoun is saying, quick question, who was the best Kaiser? I don't think that that's necessarily on topic, but I would say I don't really know.
I would
I'm
say, well,
Three
emperors.
of them.
Well,
I wasn't
Kaiser.
really fond of Kaiser Wilhelm II. I don't know.
German.
Well,
Yes. If we're talking Austrian, I'm 100% Emperor Karl of Austria.
yeah.
That's my
Bless you,
pick.
Carl. Well, you got
Yeah.
Karl Marx, and then you got the cooler Karl, Blessed Karl of Austria.
Yes.
Karl, the cooler Karl.
But yeah,
yes.
that was the only question. Yeah. I think you wanted us to say Kaiser Wilhelm II because of his PhD.
Okay. All
I
right.
like
Well,
Kaiser
let
Wilhelm II in
us.
some ways.
Right?
Let's end in
Yeah. So
prayer.
let's end. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, the Lord of mercies, grant to the souls of thy servants and handmaids, the anniversary of whose death we commemorate, an abode of refreshment, the beatitude of rest, and the brightness of light through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord.
And may the perpetual light shine upon them. May their souls and all the souls of the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy
Holy
Spirit.
Ghost, amen.
All right, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah.
These go up on YouTube on Mondays. If you would like to join us live, you can join the Monarchists of America Discord server Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So with that, may God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.